So I'm Cheryl Burke, Associate Conference Minister for the Michigan Conference, United Church of Christ. It is an honor and joy to introduce our keynote speaker to you today. I have known her as teacher, coach, colleague, and friend. The Reverend Dr. Claire Bamberg comes to us from Randolph Center, Vermont. She's the founder and CEO of Potentials Coaching and Consulting. She and her team work with clergy, congregations, nonprofits, and CEOs all over the country, providing individual and team coaching, as well as strategic planning and visioning support. Who doesn't need that? Claire is an ordained minister, ordained member of the United Church of Christ, and a certified mediator. She has a doctorate in mental health and is a professional certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. She is delighted to be with us here today, and we are thrilled to have you here with us, Claire.
I was telling Peter I don't tether well, so I'm going to start here, but I've got a lavalier mic on because I wander. I'm going to do a little Southwest Airlines thing. You want to start the first slide, Peter? Just be sure you're in the right plane. We are here at the Michigan Conference of the United Church of Christ. This is indeed your annual meeting. Today is October. That's wrong. Yeah, that's wrong. Today is October 28th, and I'm thrilled and delighted to be here. I will have a conversation with Olivia later. The next slide is a representation of a little bit about us. I wanted you to be aware of our mission at Potentials is to work alongside you, encouraging awareness, supporting crucial and innovative change towards achieving your goals. So just to truth in lending, this isn't about staying the same. Okay? All right. So let me talk with you a little bit. A number of years ago, we were all going about our business, and this thing called a pandemic happened. And while we were locked down for 3 years, the world changed. Now, there are many, many impacts that came out of that, but the one we haven't paid enough attention to as a culture and a country and congregations is the grief. Not just at the empty places in the pews, not just at the change in our family structures, perhaps, or the current figures, last time I got them, was for every one person who died in the pandemic, 9 were intimately affected. So not only for our own losses, but for the losses of others, for the change in the culture, and in the true, what do I want to say, importation of a saying, who moved our church? Right? Who moved our church? When I hear people say, let's get back to normal, I wince. So first of all, we're not going back. So don't look back. We're not headed in that direction. And secondly, normal didn't work for most of the globe, including the globe itself. So looking forward to sustainable, inclusive, creative, innovative change so that we can move into the future to which God is calling us as church. So I heard Lillian ask somebody last night who was talking about their congregation, what's your purpose? I want you to stop And I want you to take a moment, and I want you to think, what is your purpose? What is your purpose as an individual? What is your purpose as a member of the congregation and that congregation's purpose? Could you say it in a sentence or two? Since the pandemic, what we're getting is a plethora of calls because people don't know what their purpose is anymore. So, what is our purpose now? Right? So we're going to add a piece to that question. What is our purpose now? Or, in true Simon Sinek fashion, what is our why? Why do we exist? Why are we functioning in the world? Purpose often distinguishes one body from another. So, as a whole, we can say some things about what it means to be a part of this denomination. I'm from New England. There's one state in which we have 350 UCC churches. I'm pretty sure there are not 350 purpose statements that vary much. So let's think about what you uniquely bring, because that often drives our mission. So Cheryl mentioned that I'm a professional certified coach. Part of what I do is teach people how to ask questions. And part of the asking questions has to do with something called artful language. Part of that is timing, part of that is emphasis, and part of that are the words that are used. There's a reason it takes 125 hours to do the classroom part of becoming a certified coach. I want to share with you an example of how that can impact. My son is an actor, and he used this phrase. It's, "I love your red shoes." I love your red shoes. So-and-so doesn't like them very much. I love your red shoes. Your red dress, not so much. I love your red shoes. Same thing. I love your red shoes. Right? So I want to offer this question. Peter, if we could put this one up. How do we, this is the orienting question, and I'm going to do the same thing with it that we do with I love your red shoes, right? I love your red shoes. I love your red shoes, not your green ones, right? So how do we respond to God's call to be church in a hurting world? Who are we? We are the United Church of Christ. When I wrote earlier today and said, so how's it going? Somebody wrote back and said, the UCC continues to lead in social justice and societal issues. Yay. Along with the UUA, right, our partners in crime, and somewhat the DOC, but the UCC is definitely in the forefront. And people like to say to me, we are the best kept secret. They say it with laughter. That's not funny. Right? If we're living the truth of that statement, that the UCC continues to lead in social justice and societal issues, then we're showing that. Instead, we're all too often focusing on shrinking resources. Human, capital, and material. So it used to be that there was this theorem. If you have young families, you'll have money. If you'll have money, you can support the building to which the young families will come, right? And that equals sustainability. Doesn't work that way anymore. We do not live in a Christian nation. People do not move to town and look in the phone book for the nearest UCC church and begin to orient. When I first served in Vermont, it used to be you found a church in order to make connections, because Vermont. But that's not true anymore, right? So we have to find ways of distinguishing ourselves. we have to find ways of distinguishing ourselves. We know there are at least 6 generations of what we used to consider potential church joiners who don't join things. At least 6. What they will do is give you 150% of everything they have to offer if the initiative and the outcomes that it embraces are going to make a difference in the world, a positive difference in the world. Research study after research study. Lillian, I remember hearing you give a talk and talk about SBNR, right? It was all SBNR, and like, what the heck? SBNR is a thing, so spiritual but not religious, right? And when I did a Mission Insight report for Massachusetts church that was trying to figure out what it was going to be when it grew up, one of the things I found was that every single marker of what drew people to that church initially 40 years ago or more, people were looking for now. The young people who'd be moving into that area. The difference? They did not believe they needed to go to church, to a building, to find that. They were looking for a place in which they could live out those heartfelt initiatives that they felt like they could belong to and would make a difference. So how are we, the UCC, how are we bringing that to bear in a world that needs it? Lillian, you talked this morning about a tent in the desert, and when I was reading the title, I thought, oh, it's like a movable feast, right? That if you're living the tent image, you're moving that. I hate to break it to you, but the tents didn't stay stable in the Middle East, right? So you're moving that, and with that, you're bringing information and you're bringing invitation, not because you're going out and, like Jesus did, say, come to the synagogue on Friday night and I'll tell you what my dad has to say. That would never happen, right? Jesus went out and met people where they were. He looked into their eyes. He spoke to their hearts. And they knew they were loved and included. When you move your tent, when you open the flaps and step outside, that's a part of what the UCC brings into the world. Strut it. It is not good to be a well-kept secret. When I was serving the church in Plainville, Connecticut, it's a crazy success story. I just hit it at the right time. But our church school went from 5 kids to 95. The attendance went from 20 to over 120. And people ask me, how'd you do it? We're just doing church. And whatever people were finding there, they went and talked about. It was something they could take to work, right? And they talked about it at work. They weren't afraid. They did not keep that congregation a well-kept secret. If you were going to go and talk to your best friend, who is not a member of the congregation, all right, somebody outside of the congregation, if you were going to talk to somebody new in town, what would you hope, if you were going to have a realtor represent you, what would you hope they would say about your congregation? Their purpose is, I had one church say, oh, we're the white church on the hill. That's not good. They were very proud. I was like, that's not good. Let's talk about that a little bit. So if you get out of the tent and you lift your head up and you look around you, what does it mean to live God's good news in that place? There's a church we work with in the Southwest, in a very particular environment who took clipboards and went out to the neighbors to the church and asked people, where do you hurt? Where do you hurt? And then built the programs that would minister to those hurts. Yoga on certain days. And this is the thing, folks, figuring out how to matter to your communities, right? So thinking in terms of parish, thinking in terms of impact, blooming where you're planted. Whatever analogy or metaphor is going to work for you, that's our future. One of the stories I love, is the story of Ruth and Naomi. Can we just focus on that together for a moment? Ruth left everything she knew. Why? That's not rhetorical. Tell me why. Why? What did she love? Thank you. What did she love? Okay, let's go back a little bit. Yes, she did love her mother-in-law. She loved what she saw, the ways in which her mother-in-law lived. She was attracted to the God that woman lived out. If people watch the way you live your lives, what God are you witnessing to? I mean that. So if you think about the story of Ruth and Naomi, and you challenge yourself with, if people watch me go about my daily life, what God am I evidencing for them? That is how we will begin to make the positive impact in the world that we're called to do and be. We, the United Church of Christ. Social justice, DEIJB, all the things that we have to offer. I talked about communities. Lillian said, bring me success stories. So let's talk a little bit about some success stories all over the nation of the way churches are being church in their communities in different ways. So there is one church, this one's in Massachusetts, where they were a threshold church. They felt pretty clearly that they were, quote unquote, running out of money, and they needed to figure out what they were going to do next. Their building is beautiful. However, it's situated in a place in town where it is a neighborhood icon. It is not in the center of town. The big UCC church is in the center of town. So one of the things we talked about, they had 6 options. I love options. There is never just one thing you can do. So they had 6 options of things to do, and there 2 rows to the top. One was to go to the neighbor, actually 3. One was to go to the neighborhood and say, we matter to you, why? And what can we do to become more for you? Taking that information, going to the town, interviewing people in the town who could tell them, where do our kids hurt? Where do the marginalized hurt? They then began to vet partners. Who could come in and take over the church, from whom they could rent back some space on occasion and know they were making a positive impact. That was the one that rose to the top. There are some others. So we fold our tent and we start meeting in storefronts while we figure out who to give all our money to make a positive difference in the world. Another was to join with that big UCC church, not consolidating, but for their church to become a satellite campus. So because they were so importantly positioned in the town, for this kind of marginalized enclave to actually make that matter. Wonderful options, all of them. The ones they didn't choose, stayed doing the same, right? They didn't choose consolidating and selling their building, and they're still figuring out who to partner with. I've got them working with a national organization. I'll just give you the name. It's called Partners for Sacred Places. I've got them working with them to figure out how to renovate and restructure the interior to meet the needs of these partner organizations and improve the physical structure. That's one, I think, pretty good success story. Another one is a church that in Vermont with which I began to work, and when I arrived for the first meeting, they showed me all 5 apartment buildings that they owned, the books being embedded in the church books. And you know, the first question out of my mouth, I'm pretty direct. The first question out of my mouth was, so do you want to be shut down by the IRS? I'm just curious. So things have changed, and as they begin to take a look at their purpose, they're in a very poor part of Vermont called the Northeast Kingdom. They really saw it as their mission to provide affordable housing. And it was costing them more than they had to give. So they're partnering with HUD and other organizations in the area to maintain the apartments as affordable housing and get out from underneath the weight themselves and begin to do the work to renovate the rest of their church, out of which they run food initiatives and warming shelters, and so it will increase the other ministries that they're doing. So divesting, in some ways, to actually accomplish their mission and purpose and increase other impact that they can have. How much of this sounds like what you grew up with? Because we need to change. We need to change how we approach church. Sometimes, I actually was working with a church on the Cape a couple of weeks ago, and I said, you have permission to laugh. I hope you will. When I work with churches, there are 2 things. One is they say, we really, 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 really want new people. And we really, 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 really don't want to change. I'm like, doesn't work, right? The other thing I will say is, you know, if the 50s ever come back to the U.S., mainline Protestant churches are ready. They're not coming, thank you for laughing. They're not coming back. We really, really have to get our heads lifted up and look out for what new thing is God calling us to. Another church is actually located in Sonoma, California. They have 4 acres of land. You do the math. In Sonoma. They have a nice structure, beautiful structure. They have a Jewish congregation that works with them. They have a day school that's in and out of there. And they have 4 acres of land. And they have 20 people in the congregation. I love you. So what they're talking about doing, creatively and innovatively, is selling a portion of their land for a mission purpose. They want to commit themselves to ecological justice and to claim that as their purpose and mission as a congregation. I think that's a success story. Another one, this is a fascinating one actually. So there's a church in a very wealthy part of Massachusetts, which may seem redundant to some, but it's not. And they just did a self-study for a capital campaign. And without blinking an eye, they can raise whatever money they want. Without blinking an eye. And the consultant told them not to go ahead with it. There was no mission, there was no purpose. All they were going to do was fix up their building. To what end? For what purpose? And until you can begin to answer those questions, even if you can, don't. That is not the world or the mission to which God is calling us. Jesus did not say, come to the synagogue on a Friday night. Jesus went out. Our buildings, how many of them are empty most of the week? Yikes! We're in a hurting world. So, one of the other conversations we had last night, see, there's a reason I went to that last night, was around the use of money. No one likes to talk about money. No one likes to ask for money. When can I say that? All right. So when Lillian got to her first church as an intern, which God bless her, I had turned down 10 years earlier. Like, yeah, I'm not working with you guys. One of the first things the pastor said when she said, I want to learn things, like I want to do stewardship, was, here you go, you got it, right? He'd been there, 25 years at that point? Yeah, done with stewardship. So one of the things I said as we were sitting around the table is, what did I get wrong? Yeah, okay. One of the things is, I shouldn't have turned him down, is that what you said? Oh, yes, I should have. It was a different guy then. We'll talk. So one of the things I said is, a very wise woman once said to me when I was struggling with some of these questions, think of money as energy. Where are you putting your energy? What does your congregation's budget say you really care about? Oh, oops. Right? Take a look. Where are you putting your energy as a household, as a congregation, as a people of God? I work with this is a huge success story, although not in the ways you might think. I work with a church in Vermont, another part, not in the Northeast Kingdom, a more affluent part, who came into a $1.9 million windfall. They made the courageous decision not to put any of it in endowment. Zip. Now, they may eventually set some money aside. We're still working on that. But they took 3 years to study internally, who are we, what do we believe in, what do we believe we're being called to do, what's it going to take for us to get to those calls. 40 proposals of how to use this money. 40, as my kids would say. Is that 40, Mom, or 14? 40. We boiled it down to 9. And the guy who started out saying, this all needs to go in endowment, we should be focusing on, came up to me during the discernment vote casting and said, you know what, Claire? I think if we really focus on this, we can do all of this. One of them is a $16 million transitional housing for 24 units that would be adjacent to the church, that would serve the large immigrant and refugee populations that are moving into that area right now, that fly under the radar screen and don't get the support they need. And guess what? They're turning their basement into a daycare, specifically targeting 1 to 3. The kids who get too far along and don't get the services they need, of the people who will be in the transitional housing. And that's just 2 of the initiatives. Now, obviously, they're not going to do that tomorrow, not with $1.9 million seed money. And they've lifted their heads up. They've asked. They've looked around. And this is what it means to be, for them, a people with a mission and a purpose under God in a world that is hurting. This is their we. Can you do the next slide, Peter? God's call. When I was doing mental health work, always gave me pause when people said, I know what you think. Okay, so how about you tell me what I think? And they would, by the way, they would. And I would say, so you think, I think, whatever. And they would say yes. And I would say, so would you like to know what I think, or do you just want to believe you know what I think? Which brought them up short. How often do we do that to God? Because it aligns with what we think. How often is God in the safety zone? Just asking. How often is your God in the safety zone? Think about Pentecost. Those disciples had to leave the safety of that upper room. They could have stayed there. They had this nice, wonderful experience they'd all had together. The world was out there waiting to do harm. There wasn't a whole lot of a denomination ready and waiting. What was their call? To go out and be church. One cloak, no food. To go and live the way. In fact, the earliest Christians were called the people of the way. They were not Christians. You all understand that, right? It's like when I do communion and I do it in Hebrew and people are like, it's like, you know, Jesus didn't speak English, right? So there are, examining what we've told ourselves is safe, normal, what we're supposed to do, because we can. God doesn't call us to what we can already do in most cases unless it's to empower another or forward a vision. If you move beyond your safety zone, what new worlds are you going to open up? In response to whose call? Yeah, which means we know it always, right? We know exactly what we're being called to do. Not. In fact, I might go so far as to say for us as a denomination right now, if we think we know, thank you, we don't, right? It's the not knowing. What I say to the coaches I train is actually your not knowing is your biggest advantage, because you'll ask the question that somebody who thinks they know won't. What do you not know that you could explore about being church in God's world? Can we go to the next slide, Peter? Being church. Can you give me some examples of being church? Again, not rhetorical. Can you give me some examples? Food pantries. Say it again. Oh, okay, yeah. Yes. Yep. Shelter for the homeless. Ministering to the hurting. And what does that look like for you when you do that? Okay. So I had a minister that I was working with at one point, and she actually would, on a Sunday, go to a nearby park the same time every Sunday so people knew she was going to be there, and offer worship, which was great. And then they would transform the table into a place where people could get food. And she apologized to me, saying, Claire, it's all the same table. Are you kidding me? That's a book title. It's all the same table. And if you're not a Carrie Newcomer fan, I want you to be. This wonderful song, there is room at the table for everyone. We get to live that out. How do we live that out? It's one thing to say to people, come and get. Do you know that Sunday mornings for a stranger to walk into a church, it takes the most courage in their lives, right? they don't know how they're going to be received, and they have to walk into a building. How are we bringing the mission out? How are we bringing the ministry out? How are we demonstrating to people that we are here for them? This same church that I just started to work with, there's a lovely, lovely woman who was a graphic designer in her day. You hear what I'm saying? And she wanted to send out postcards to people in the area saying, "Come join us." And I said, because I didn't want to hurt her feelings or rain on her parade, there's a little bit of an implication there that there's an us and them. You're talking about being a little church with a big heart. What would it mean to extend that a little bit? To say it again? Let's join together. Thank you. You can come with me. Let's join together. What could we do together? What wonderful thing could we make happen together? What if we weren't so worried about our turf? How many of you have another UCC church in your town? All right, and how often is it, and who's, and what, and right? What if we weren't so worried about turf? But instead, we were aware that we are much greater together. Right? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts it's made of. So we can be the church. We can do signs and banners. I was thinking that as I drove over here today. Unless you're in a historic district in a New England town and then you're sunk, you got to find another way of doing that. And then there's living out and letting the SBNRs find you because you're witnessing to initiatives they really believe will make a positive difference in God's world. By the way, none of these requires a building. None of these requires a building. Say it again? Heresy. That's me. I did say, we're not going to talk about same. And what with the buildings? So some of the initiatives that we've been working on, again, throughout the nation. Shared space. I had a first-hand experience with this in the Isle of Skye, when a woman that we were staying with in a B&B found out I was a minister and asked if I would like to attend a Gaelic worship service. Yes, please. And we went to the address that was given on foot because it's the Isle of Skye, and we showed up in a elementary school. And we were greeted in the hallway and shown in to the cafeteria. And the music was offered by the town doctor, who stood up there with the words, and in time led the congregation in the hymn. No instruments, just heart. No instruments, just heart. Another is a church that I'm working with in Hell's Kitchen, New York. And this is a success story that is like beyond our wildest imaginations. This is literally a building that's falling down around them. Out of which, well, first of all, on the top, the roof, is a garden that grows fresh vegetables it's New York, so when it can. And those vegetables are brought downstairs and used in the food kitchen that is open 24/7, next to the laundry machines that are available to people who need that, which is also next to this huge clothing offering that is available in the winter. That may change. They are literally at the mouth of the Port of Authority, and every refugee or immigrant who is sent from the border ends up on their doorstep. On the second floor, there is a school for latchkey kids. And these kids come in and they get support. They have uniforms, they're there to learn. On the third floor is a pastoral counseling office from a former minister who's very boundaried, by the way, it's okay, and a resource center for women coming out of prison, a resource center for LGBTQ kids who have been kicked out of their homes, and a ministry for getting them on their feet. When you walk in the front door, there's a basket in the reception area for anyone who's wandering in off the street and needs toiletries. The worship space is all movable chairs, and there's lighting. Because it's a performance space, part of how they support their mission and ministry is they have tons of actors and Broadway artists who come in and actually do shows, starting with their teens in schools for the arts, and a portion of it goes to support the ministry. I could go on. Working with Sacred Places, I encourage them to do an economic halo. The economic halo effect measures the positive impact that you make in a certain area, and it quantifies it. Anybody want to guess what their economic halo value was? Say it again? Oh, it is in the millions, yeah. Well, thanks. We'll get there. That's after the renovations. Thank you, Cheryl. So 14 million in this crumbling down, used to be a Polish Catholic church, which, when Port Authority came in and decimated the neighborhood, was available for this church to move into and inhabit. This is truly a case of the tail wagging the dog, right? That they worship in there, that they have things going on, and this is a tremendous success story about shared space. Then there's a new thing that's happening in the nation. It's collaboration. That is different than consolidation. All right? When two churches collaborate, they come alongside and they can share ministries, they can share ministers, right? They maintain their cultures, which can be a little dicey to work with, but we work it out. And they serve a wider area and enhance the ministries in that area. There are several churches in several parts of the nation that are exploring that right now because they don't want to give up. They're building their identity, their mission, right? So that's another way to get over the turf thing and instead be greater because you have the sum of the parts. Then there's consolidation. So I tell this story, and every time I do, Cheryl Burke says to me, "Thanks a lot." So, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, the work I did with two churches in Connecticut was featured in the United Church. And anyone who had tried consolidations were calling and saying, "How did you do that?" And Liz Miller, who left Michigan Conference, is now serving those two churches as their first called minister as a consolidated church. They decided to keep 2 campuses and to do different things with those, right? So they are one congregation with 2 campuses. Some consolidate and they sell one of the buildings, or some that's another one that I work with in Massachusetts. It depends. It's not one size fits all. That's what I really want you to hear. It is not one size fits all. We all can do this. Respond to God's call in ways that are creative and innovative. Sorry, Cheryl. The reason that consolidations blow up is that There's one I worked with in Vermont. They consolidated buildings. They consolidated monies, kind of. They moved them together, but they kept them in separate accounts. But what they didn't do was get to know one another. So 5 years into this consolidation that wasn't, when I got on the scene, they were to introduce themselves to me as members of the former church. Like, this is not working, people. So there is a body of information that if you're thinking about consolidating, I want to bring to your attention. Steve Zweiback, or not like the cracker, Zweiback, expanded on Margaret Wheatley's work. She calls it the 6 circle model, and he talks about the below the green line work. The below the green line work is something we all need to be doing, honestly, within our congregations, having conversations, really listening to one another, figuring out what our purpose is together. Those are all important things. I'm trying to watch time. All right, let's do the next slide. All right. We are living in a world, on a planet, that is hurting. There is honestly plenty for us to do. We don't have to worry about if we're the big cheese in that particular part. Working together, that's where we're going to make a difference. Get outside the tent. Thank you for that image. And move out. It's not a desert out there. Just feels that way when we're talking about what we don't have. What do we have? Plenty. So, with whom? And this is part of what changed in Plainville. We would get into council meetings and I would say, okay, great ideas. With whom around this table will you work to accomplish that? Well, that's our silo. You mean we have to get out? You have to work with each other. Right? So with whom will you work to accomplish this? How will you maximize the many, many gifts that God has seen fit to give you and your congregation and you as a conference? What is your purpose? So I'm going to venture out and give you a thought. I think that our purpose as a people of faith is to be, not be in, God's church. To be God's church. Healing, not holding forth, but actually getting in and healing and encountering and living with and hearing and hurting with. Healing in a hurting world. Honestly, there's plenty to do. And we will do much more if we can do it together. And it will require new ways of doing and being. We are not going back. We can't go back. We are called forward. So, if you'll put up the last one, Peter, and just leave it there. So, if you take a look at the numbers of options that we have, if you are a threshold church, it just means you're in a place where to make a decision, right? And any number, again, did I mention earlier I love choices? Any number of decisions are open to you. This is on our website if you want to go take a look at the full descriptions and stuff. The consolidating we've talked about, the collaborating, staffing patterns, strategic reorganization. I don't mean organizing people out of a job. I mean being strategic about how we reorganize. My answer will not be your answer. Your answer will not be your neighbor's answer. When you take a look at what it means to be on a threshold, your answer will be God's answer for you, and it will be different. whether you revision, whether you move towards a legacy situation, and too many people use legacy instead of closure. Legacy means taking a long, hard look at purpose and figure out how you're going to make it happen when you are no longer in that building or have decided to do something else. What is your legacy is the question to ask yourself. And all of it is innovating. So if you revitalize, like the church in Vermont, what's your vision? How do you revitalize? What is going to be innovative? These are all just questions for you to ask yourself as you begin to take a look at the very serious question, which I'm not going to ask Peter to go back to. How do we respond to God's call to be church in a hurting world? All those things. How do we, God's call, be church in a world that needs everything we have to offer? And if you go to the last slide again, I'd like to ask you to consider this. Our purpose is to empower thoughtful, creative people and systems towards sustainable change, making a difference in the world, comma, talking to Olivia again, for the good of the whole. For the good of the whole, under God. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Claire. We have, I think, about a half an hour for questions, or whatever time we need. You did a good job.
25 minutes.
25 minutes for
and
questions.
Keep you on schedule.
It would be helpful if you would come and use the microphone. That's difficult to do for some, but please try to do that because we have some people online as well.
Right. We have some.
So
this
people,
will be live streamed.
Yeah.
So you made the decision not to hybrid, which is fine. And people who are live streaming, they want to hear it all. So questions. You can also ask, and I'll repeat them if that would be helpful. If you don't want to come up. Yes. It is being recorded. It's being go ahead, Peter, you answer that one.
This is being live streamed on the Plymouth Facebook, Vimeo, and YouTube sites. Jen Ringgold will have the links and will be able to send those to any church minister here or associate in order to be able to disseminate to however you wish to disseminate it to.
Yeah, good question. Yes, sir.
I don't really have a question, but I am from Salem. I am from Salem, UCC in Saline. I am the designated pastor, and we are working with you because we are trying to do a joint, not a consolidation, but sharing a full-time pastor between us and the church in Clinton, which is 15 miles away. So we have been working very hard for the last year and a half to try and put this together. What does it look like? What are the goals of both churches? What are both congregations looking for in a pastor? It's been a journey, a long journey, but we have a candidate that we have a second interview with. And so I think we're making progress, and I just wanted to share, I guess, a success story right here in Michigan.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I was not going to offer that up unless somebody in the churches wanted to. Yeah, it's coming to a conference near you, right? This innovative, creative question that will take you out of the tent is coming to a conference near you. That's the good news.
Claire, I just want to say, with New Church Starts, one of the things I learned early on was that they had no idea where they were going.
Yeah.
What they could see was the next step.
Yes.
And if they took that next step, then the next step would become more clear. Can you say something about that?
I didn't train you as a coach, did I? Those next steps. So there is a point at which, when you're trying to figure out purpose, vision, mission, there are times where, particularly when you're doing a new and innovative thing, remember I said not knowing is your friend? The not knowing, right, is part of what lets you do the imagining. And what I will often ask churches that I'm working with, congregations that I'm working, is what outrageous idea have you decided not to consider? Or, what is the thing you keep telling yourself won't work? Right? So we're getting outside of those, what's called limiting beliefs in coaching. And there are times where, one of the things that coaching does really well is help things happen. Because usually we get to the end of the meeting and everybody agrees, yeah, we're gonna, and how many times does that happen? Has anybody ever been with a church where you're still discussing 3 years later when you're gonna, yeah, okay, same thing. So next steps, when you begin to do that, when you begin to know how to do that, which is why it helps to have a certified coach, is to begin to think about what are those next steps. And you do it in the group, right? Who can step forward? How will you measure success? That is my huge one. How will you measure success? It's very fine to dream the dream, and we need that. What's success going to look like? How will you know you're on the right track and that you're getting there? So next steps really help with that. And yes, you're right, there is a next step, and then there's a next step. And any of this, what Jim was speaking about, any of what I'm talking about, all has its own developmental cycle. It is not a cakewalk, and you do not get from A to B like this, it's like this, right? So you have to buckle your seatbelt and be on the journey and really answer those next step questions. Thanks, Cheryl. Somebody else. Are you coming up to the mic? Yes, sir. No, go ahead, Shirley. Go ahead. You can ask while she's moving. We're good. Okay.
I've known Claire for quite a few years after working with her a little bit, and it's ironic because we had been in conversation for the last couple days and actually reconnected at Synod, and I had no idea that she was talking about the exact same book that I am going through with my church.
Oh, cool.
And so she's saying all the stuff that this book, $10 on Amazon, I don't get paid for this, but
I've not read that yet. I need to read it, apparently.
It is all the exact same stuff because it's by Partners for Sacred Spaces.
That's why. Yeah.
And this is something that even if you aren't necessarily looking at selling your church property, it gives some really innovative stories in here of ways that our spaces can be used and used by the community, not just us as a church, because that is throwing open the doors. And not us only going out, but inviting everybody out there in. So I highly recommend this book. I highly recommend Claire. And that's all I have to say. Sorry. It is a yellow book on Amazon called Transitioning Older and Historic Sacred Spaces, and there's a lot of stuff after that.
You do not need to get it on Amazon. You tell me how many copies you want, and I will have them directly sent to the conference office, if that would be helpful.
There we go.
Yeah.
It also comes in a PDF form.
Yep.
So, yep. It is fantastic. It's a great read for everybody to go through in your congregation with, and it's a way to maybe initiate some of those conversations we know needs to happen, but we don't have the language or the tools with how to start even having that conversation, because it feels very threatening. It feels like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. And when you start learning, it's not a scary thing. There's a lot of hope out there, and this book is very hopeful. It's not we're losing ground and we're all going to die. This is the rebirth. This is what you have to have, a death of something. Just Jesus died for us, and we are the resurrection people. This is the resurrection ministry.
And if you speak with one of the department heads and they think your church isn't ready yet, you wouldn't be the first church they'd referred to us to do the underneath work, below the green line work, so you can move into whatever you do move into next in consensus. That's a good thing, right? So there's a shared vision and a shared understanding of what's next and the next steps. Yeah, they're very, very wise. Anybody else? Yes? Could you unpack a little bit what you mean by under the green line? Under the green line. So very often when organizations reorganize or come together, they start with where are we going to be, what are we going to do, so all those things. What they don't do is they don't go underneath that line and ask, who are we, right? What values do we share? The thing that made the consolidation work in Connecticut was that we spent time breaking them into groups. Each church was equally represented to look at mission, to look at purpose, to look at worship. And that talking and finding out, we did one whole worship service on why. What is your why? And they were astonished to find that they had similar ideas, right? So the word clouds that were generated out of the work that we did showed them more similarities and difference. That doesn't typically happen. That's below the green line work. Does that help? Yeah. You're heading for a microphone. Okay.
I keep hearing this statement. I keep hearing the statement, I'm spiritual, but not religious.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I can belong to that organization. Oh, yes, I'm going to do this. Oh, yes, I'm working with that. But a church, a family of faith, is more than just actions. It's more taking care of each other. How do you comment? How do you invite people that want to be spiritual to be connected?
So there's a psychology to this, and I learned it following a 13-year-old down the hallway of the church, and listening to her say to a fellow confirmand, hey, you know what? We were going by in the bus this morning, and I said to the kids next to me, there's my church. My jaw dropped. Her family dropped her off for confirmation class, you know? And what she was pointing to was the banner we had in front, the Be the Church banner, and proudly lifting up those things. So to go to your answer, part of what makes the shift for people from the SB&R to being willing to take the risk to affiliate with a body that has an identity is knowing that the values are shared. And that is a lived experience. So what I'm a marriage and family therapist, among other things, and when I work with a family, I will say a family is a family when the youngest member can say, remember when. They are part of the narrative. A congregation is a congregation when the newest member can say, remember when. And if we are doing our job, we have remember when going on all the time that will include people. And that's part of how that transition happens, is the initiatives create an understanding of shared value and the willingness to declare oneself a part of that, right? So again, you know, all too often I'll hear from people, I don't go to that church anymore, our values parted ways. Right? So it's the shared value that makes the identity. And yes, you are right, caring for one another also grows out of that, the familiarity. In this world, it doesn't start there, though. In the world now. Yes, sir.
If you're in favor of these things, moving forward, trying to do unique things, how do you deal, what's the best way, could you help us understand how to deal with traditionalist negativity? You know, how do we bring people that are solid members of the church but don't have the same vision? How do you get them to at least put up with what you're trying to do?
Well, let's not put up with what we're trying to do. Let's get some buy-in. The answer is really simple and really challenging. It begins by talking with one another. It begins with really deeply listening to one another. Thanks, Peter. We have a round of applause for that gentleman. He's amazing. I'm not saying this lightly. This is not easy stuff. It means listening to understand. I led worship with an imam this summer who talked about when he went to buy his first house. He's the imam at Middlebury College. When he went to buy his first house in the area, the neighbor said to him, "So are you a terrorist?" Okay. And the way he overcame that kind of prejudice was not by confronting it head on. It was by talking and listening and finding those shared values. And that's what it's going to take. There's a church in Ohio that's developing a ministry it's calling Purple Cloth because they have such division in the congregation between red and blue. Right? So the ministry is Purple Cloth. We all have to be ready and willing to engage in creating Purple Cloth ministry. It means listening to the traditionalists. It means understanding what they're going to grieve. When I start with a church like that, I ask a body of people to please write down what is the one thing. It can be an item, right? It can be a service, a type of service, a practice. It can be anything. What is the one thing that they hold sacred for themselves about that congregation and that experience? And I ask them to write about it. I ask them to talk to each other about it. And then for the next week, I ask them to go and write an obituary for it. An obituary for it. Because if you can't let go, you can't do a new thing. And it is transformative for people, right? There are other questions that go along with that activity, and that activity itself is a very important one. So in the listening, you're going to hear what is potentially grieving and what are the sacred things that actually in spirit you can carry forward. And that will matter. Yeah.
I'm Susan Sikulka from Mount Pleasant. So having worked with several congregations with very ingrained family systems and people who have been literally members of a particular congregation for 70 years, one of the things I repeatedly found, I really love your purple cloth idea, that before the grief came the understanding or the question, but Pastor so-and-so told me this. Do you mean that I've been lied to all my life? That I have attached my life and my theology to something that was not true? And had to work through that before we could ever get to the grief. It was like the preliminary step, and I have come across that many, many, many times over the years.
Yeah,
Do you have anything to
what you've
say
got
to
going
that?
on there, though, is actually an intersection of two things. One is a family culture in a pastoral referenced church, right? So Susan Beaumont writes about a lot of things. That, however, you have touched upon an intersectionality that makes it particularly challenging to do these things. I was blessed when I went to serve my very first church, not in Connecticut, but in Vermont, with a conference minister who sat me down when I got there and said, in your first 2 years, you have 2 jobs. One is to be a lover, and the other is to be a historian. You get exactly 2 changes before you're an outsider. So choose wisely. That is, we're human. That is true. Love me, understand me. Then let's talk about, right? So when you're coming in as a new person, and particularly when you're coming in during COVID, that's a whole new thing. Taking the time, making the effort to really understand what system have you entered, what developmental phase are they in, what unique challenges does that present to the ability to even begin to ask these questions. So if you try to blow past them, you're going to leave them behind. Does that help? Does that make sense? I mean, you did it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
But they were locked down because that would require them to somehow betray a previous pastor from 60 years ago.
That too, yes. So to take the phrase you used, trying to help people think creatively, first you have to understand who the people are, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about. And what ghosts and and what Paul Bunyans there are in the past. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I just want to say thank you for your brilliant work. I've known you for years and years, and I just love hearing what you say. But what do you have to say for the folks who are just tired? They're exhausted. This all sounds wonderful, but maybe they've tried other things before, or maybe they didn't ask those really important questions, and now they're listening to what you're saying, and they're going, do I have the strength to do that again?
Yeah, so it's change the pronoun, right? It's not I. And remember Jesus. Jesus freaked the disciples out the first time he did this. He went and rested before he went to be with the crowds. Freaked them out, right? So especially now, Lawrence, this is what's happening in our churches. Actually, Lily and I were talking about this last night, is you've got churches going like the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz. I'm tired, you do it. With their pastors and with one another. And counterintuitively, it's let's all do nothing while we begin to figure out who are we now? What are we going to do next? And what are we moving towards? There's a really bad metaphor. It's fire, ready, aim. Too many churches are doing that. It's not funny, right? Too many churches are doing that. Let's do something. That didn't work. Now what? Right now, who are we? Now what are we doing? So it really is taking the time to be attentive to what the call is. You may freak the disciples out, but it's okay to take care of yourself. You're going to need that energy. I want to be respectful. We have 4 minutes. Okay, you'll know how to find me. And I've got stuff with me if you want it, because Cheryl told me you would. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Claire.
you.